The Defense of Love. Discusses passionate love, its sanction, its place in marriage, and its preservation in marriage. I have before me, as I write, a newspaper article by Robert Blatchford, a great writer and great man. He is dealing with the subject of love and marriage, and his doctrine is summed up in the following sentences. There is a difference between loving a woman and falling in love with her. The love one falls into is a sweet illusion, but that fragrant dream does not last. In marriage, there are no fairies. This expresses one of the commonest ideas in the world. Passionate love is one thing, and marriage is another and different thing, and it is no more possible to reconcile them than to mix oil and water. Our notions of romantic love took their rise in the Middle Ages from the songs and narratives of the troubadours, and this whole tradition was based upon the glorification of illegitimate and extramarital love. That tradition has ruled the world of art ever since, and rules it today. I do not exaggerate when I say that it is the conventional view of grand opera and the drama of moving pictures and novels that impassioned and thrilling love is found before marriage, and is found in adultery and in temptations to adultery, but is never found in marriage. I have a pretty varied acquaintance with the literature of the world, and I have sat and thought for quite a while without being able to recall a single portrait of life which contradicts this thesis. And certainly anyone familiar with literature could name 10,000 novels and dramas and grand operas which support the thesis. English and American Puritanism have beaten a tradition down to this extent: the novelist portrays the glories and thrills of young love and carries it as far as the altar and the orange blossoms and white ribbons and showers of rice, and stops. He leaves you to assume that this delightful rapture continues forever after, but he does not attempt to show it to you. He would not dare attempt to show it, because the general experience of men and women in marriage would make him ridiculous. So he runs away from the issue. If he tells you a story of married life, it is a story of a triangle, the thrills of love imperiling marriage, and either crushed out or else wrecking the lives of the victims. Such is the unanimous testimony of all our arts today, and I submit it as evidence of the fact that there must be something vitally wrong with our marriage system. Personally, I am prepared to go as far as the extreme sex radical in the defense of love and the right to love. I believe that love is the most precious of all gifts of life. I accept its sanctions and its authority. I believe that it is to be cherished and obeyed, and not to be run away from or strangled in the heart. I believe it is the voice of nature speaking in the depths of us, and speaking from a wisdom deeper than we have yet attained, or may attain for many centuries to come. And when I say love, I do not mean merely affection. I do not mean merely the habit of living in the same home, which is the basis of marriage, as Blatchford describes it. What I mean is the love of the poets and the dreamers, the young love, which is thrill and ecstasy, a glorification and a transfiguration of the whole of life. I say that, far from giving up this love for marriage, it is the true purpose of marriage to preserve this love and perpetuate it. To save repetition and waste of words, let us agree that from now on, when I use the word love, I mean the passionate love of those who are in love. I believe that it is the right of men and women to be in love, and that there is no true marriage unless they are in love and stay in love. I believe that it is possible to apply reason to love, to learn to understand love and the ways of love, to protect it and keep it alive in marriage. Blatchford writes the sentence, "Matrimony cannot be all honeymoon." I answer that assuredly it can be. And if you ask me how I know, I tell you that I know in the only way we really know anything, because I have proven it in my own life. I say that if men and women would recognize the perpetuation of the honeymoon as the purpose of marriage, and would devote to that end 100th part of the intelligence and energy they now devote to the killing of their fellow human beings in war, we might have an end to the wretched romantic tradition, which makes the most sacred emotion of the human heart into a sneak thief, skulking in the darkness, entering our lives by the back alleys and secret stairways, while greed and worldly pomp, dullness and boredom parade in by the front entrance. In the first place, what is love? Young love, passionate love, the love of those who fall in. I know a certain lady, well versed in worldly affairs, who says that it is at once the greatest nonsense and the deadliest snare in the world. This lady was trained as a coquette. She, and all the young ladies she knew, made it their business to cause men to fall in love with them, and their prestige was based upon their skill in that art. So to them, love was a joke, and men in love were victims, whether ridiculous or pitiable. To this I answer that I know nothing in life that cannot be faked, but an imitation has value only as it resembles something that is real, and that has real value. I am aware that it is possible for a society to be so corrupted, so given up to the admiration of imitations, of the paint and powder and silk stocking-clad ankle kind of love, that true and genuine love interest, with its impulse to self-sacrifice and self-consecration, is no longer felt or understood. I am aware that in such a society it is possible for even the very young to be so sophisticated that what they take to be love is merely vanity, the worship of money, and the grace and charm which the possession of money confers. I have known girls who were head over heels in love and thought it was with a man, when quite clearly they were in love with a dress suit or a social position. In such a society it is hard to talk about natural emotions and deep and abiding and disinterested affections. Nevertheless, amid all the false conventions, the sham glories and cowardices of our civilization, there abides in the heart the craving for true love, and the idea of it leaps continually into flame in the young. In spite of the ridicule of the elders, in spite of blunders and tragic failures, in spite of dishonesties and deceptions, nevertheless, it continues to happen that out of 1,000 maidens the youth finds one whose presence thrills him with a new and terrible emotion, whose lightest touch makes him shiver, almost makes his knees give way. If you will recall what I have written about instinct and reason, you will know that I am not a blind worshiper of our ancient Mother Nature. I am not humble in my attitude toward her, but perfectly willing to say when I know more than she does. On the other hand, when I know nothing or next to nothing, I am shy of contradicting my ancient mother, and disposed to give respectful heed to her promptings. One of the things about which we know almost nothing at present is the subject of eugenics. We are only at the beginning of trying to find out what matings produce the best offspring. Meantime, we ought to consider those indications which nature gives us, just as we consider her advice about what food to eat and what rest to take. It is not my idea that science will ever take men and women and marry them in cold blood, as today we breed our cattle. What I think will happen is that young men and women will meet one another, as they do at present, and will find the love impulse awakening. They will then submit their love to investigation as to whether they should follow that impulse or should wait. In other words, I do not believe that science will ever do away with the raptures of love, but will make itself the servant of these raptures, finding out what they mean and how their precious essence may be preserved. I perfectly understand that the begetting of children is not the only purpose of love. The children have to be reared and trained, which means that a home has to be founded, and the parents have to learn to cooperate. They have to have common aims in life, and temperaments sufficiently harmonious so that they can live in the house together without tearing each other's eyes out. This means that in any civilized society all impulses of love have to be subjected to severe criticism. I intend, before long, to show just how I think parents and guardians should cooperate with young people in love, to help them to understand in advance what they are doing and how it may be possible for them to make their love permanent and successful. For the moment, I merely state, to avoid any possible misunderstanding, that I am the last person in the world to favor what is called blind love, the unthinking abandonment to an impulse of sex passion. What I am trying to show is that the passionate impulse, the passionate excitement of the young couple, is the material out of which love and marriage are made. Passion is a part of us, and a fundamental part. If we do not find a place for it in marriage, it will seek satisfaction outside of marriage, and that means lying or the wrecking of the marriage, or both. Passion is what gives to love and marriage its vitality, its energy, its drive. In fact, it gives these qualities to the whole character. It is a vivifying force, transfiguring the personality, and, if it is crushed and repressed, the whole life of that person is distorted. Yet, it is a fact which every physician knows that millions of women marry and live their whole lives without ever knowing what passionate gratification is. As a consequence of this, millions of men take it for granted that there are good women and bad women, and that only the latter are interesting. This, of course, is simply one of the abnormalities caused by the supplanting of love by money as a motive in marriage. Love becomes a superfluity and a danger, and all the forces of society, including institutionalized religion, combine to outlaw it and drive it underground. Or we might say that they lock it in a dungeon, and that the supreme delight of all painters, poets, musicians, dramatists, and novelists of all climes and all periods of history is to portray the escape of the young god from these imprisonments. The story is told in 6 words of an old English ballad: "Love will find out the way." Is it not obvious that there must be something vitally wrong with our institutions and conventions in matters of sex, when here exists this eternal war between our moralists and our artists? Why not make up our minds what we really believe, whether it is true that poets are, as Shelley said, the unacknowledged legislators of mankind, or whether they are, as Plato declared, false teachers and seducers of the young? If they are the latter, let us have done with them. Let us drive them from the state, together with lovers and all other impassioned persons. But if, on the other hand, it is truth the poets tell about life, then let us take the young god out of his dungeon and bring him into our homes by the front door, and cast out the false gods of vanity and greed and worldly prestige, which now sit in his place. End of chapter 38. Chapter 39, Birth Control, deals with the prevention of conception as one of the greatest of man's discoveries, releasing him from nature's enslavement and placing the keys of life in his hands. I assume that you have followed my argument, and are prepared to consider seriously whether it may be possible to establish love in marriage as the sex institution of civilized society. If you really wish to bring such an institution into existence, the first thing you have to do is to accomplish the social revolution. That is, you must wipe out class control of society and prestige based upon money exploitation. But that is a vast change, and will take time, and meanwhile we have to live, and wish to live with as little misery as possible. So the practical question becomes this: suppose that you, as an individual, wish to find as much happiness and love as may now be possible. What counsel have I to offer? If you are young, you wish this advice for yourself, while if you are mature, you wish it for your children. I will put my advice under 4 heads. First, marriage for love. Second, birth control. Third, early marriage. Fourth, education for marriage. The first of these we have considered at some length. A part of the process of social revolution is personal conversion, the giving up by every individual of the worldly ideal, the surrender of luxury and self-indulgence, the consecrating of one's life to self-education and the cause of social justice. And do not think that that is an easy thing, or an unimportant thing, a thing to be taken for granted. On the contrary, it is something that most of us have to struggle with at every hour of our lives, because respect for property and worldly conventions has become one of our deepest instincts. Our whole society is poisoned with it, and I can count on the fingers of one hand the people I have known in my life who have completely escaped from it. It is not merely a question of refusing to marry, except for love. It is a question of refusing to love, except for honest and worthy qualities. It is a question of saving our children from the damnable forces of snobbery, which lay siege to their young minds and destroy the best impulses of their hearts, while we, in our blindness, are still thinking of them as babies. Of the other 3 topics that I have suggested, I begin with birth control, because it is the most fundamental and most important. Without birth control, there can be no freedom, no happiness, no permanence in love, and there can be no mastery of life. Birth control is one of the great fundamental achievements of the human reason, as important to the life of mankind as the discovery of fire or the invention of printing. Birth control is the deliverance of womankind, and therefore of mankind also, from the blind and insane fecundity of nature, which created us animals and would keep us animals forever if we did not rebel. Ever since the dawn of history, and probably for long ages before that, our race has been struggling against this blind insanity of nature. Poor, bewildered Theodore Roosevelt stormed at what he called race suicide, thinking it was some brand new and terrible modern corruption. But nowhere do we find a primitive tribe, nowhere in history do we find a race which did not seek to save itself from overgrowth and consequent starvation. They did not know enough to prevent conception, but they did the best they could by means of abortion and infanticide. And because today superstition keeps the priceless knowledge of contraception from the vast majority of women, these crude, savage methods still prevail, and we have our 1,000,000 abortions a year in the United States. Assuming that something near 1/4 of our population consists of women capable of bearing children, we have 1 woman in 25 going through this agonizing and health-wrecking experience every year. They go through with it, you understand, regardless of everything. All the moralists and preachers and priests with their hellfire and brimstone, they go through with it because we have both marriage without love and love without marriage. Also, because we permit some 10 or 20% of our total population to suffer the pangs of perpetual starvation. Because more than half our farms are mortgaged or occupied by tenants, and some 10 or 20% of our workers are out of jobs all the time. Some of our women know about birth control. They are the rich women who get what they want in this world. They object to the humiliations and inconveniences of childbearing, and some of them raise 1 or 2 children, and others of them raise poodle dogs. Also, our middle classes have found out, our doctors and lawyers and college professors and people of that sort, but we deliberately keep the knowledge from our foreign populations by the terrors which the church has at its command. And what is the practical consequence of this procedure? It is that while all our Anglo-Saxon stock, those who founded our country and established its institutions, are gradually removing themselves from the face of the earth, our ignorant and helpless populations, whether in city slums or on tenant farms, are multiplying like rabbits. Read Jack London's The Valley of the Moon, and see what is happening in California. You will find the same thing happening in any portion of the United States where you take the trouble to use your own eyes. Now, I try to repress such impulses toward race prejudice as I find in myself. I am willing to admit, for the sake of this argument, that in the course of time all the races that are now swarming in America, Portuguese and Japanese and Mexican and French Canadian and Polish and Hungarian and Slovakian, are capable of just as high intellectual development as our ancestors who wrote the Declaration of Independence. But no one who sees the conditions under which they now live can deny that it will take a good deal of labor, teaching them and training them, as well as scrubbing them, to accomplish that result. And what a waste of energy, what a farce it makes of culture to take the people who have already been scrubbed and taught and trained for self-government, and exterminate them, and raise up others in their place. It seems time that we gave thought to the fundamental question whether or not there is something self-destroying in the very process of culture. Unless we can answer this, we might as well give up our visions and our efforts to lift the race. Theodore Roosevelt stormed at birth control for something like 10 years, and it would be interesting if we could know how many Anglo-Saxon babies he succeeded in bringing into the world by his preachments. If what he wanted was to correct the balance between native and foreign births, how much more sensible to have taught birth control to those poor, pathetic, half-starved and overworked foreign mothers of our slums and tenant farms. I can wager that for every Anglo-Saxon baby that Theodore Roosevelt brought into the world by his preachings, he could have kept out 10,000 foreign slum babies if only he had lent his aid to Margaret Sanger. Ah, but he wanted all the babies to be born, you say. I see before me the face of a certain devout old Christian lady, known to me, who settles the question by the Bible quotation, "Be fruitful and multiply." But what avails it to follow this biblical advice if we allow 1 out of 5 of the newborn infants to perish from lack of scientific care before they are 2 years old? What avails it if we send them to school hungry, as we do 22% of the public school children in New York City? What avails it if we allow venereal disease to spread, so that a large percentage of the babies are deformed and miserable? What avails it if, when they are fully grown, we can think of nothing better to do with them than to take them by millions at a time and dress them up in uniforms and send them out to be destroyed by poison gases? Would it not be the part of common sense to establish universal birth control for at least a year or two, until we have learned to take care of our newly born babies, and to feed our school children, and to protect our youths from vice, and to abolish poverty and war from the earth. These are the social aspects of birth control. There are also to be considered what I might call the personal aspects of it. Because young people do not know about it and have no way to find out about it, they dare not marry. And so the amount of vice in the world is increased. Because married women do not know about it, love is turned to terror, and marital happiness is wrecked. Because the harmless and proper methods are not sensibly taught, people use harmful methods, which cause nervous disorders and wreck marital happiness and break up homes. Thorough and sound knowledge about birth control is just as essential to happiness in marriage as knowledge of diet is necessary to health, or as knowledge of economics is necessary to intelligent action as a voter and citizen. The suppression by law of knowledge of birth control is just as grave a crime against human life as ever was committed by religious bigotry in the blackest days of the Spanish Inquisition. Now, this law stands on the statute books of our country, and if I should so much as hint to you in this book what you need to know, or even where you can find out about it, I should be liable to 5 years in jail and a fine of $5,000. And every person who mailed a copy of this book or any advertisement of this book would be in the same plight. But there is not yet a law to prohibit agitation against the law, so the first thing I say to every reader of this book is that they should obtain a copy of the Birth Control Review, published at 104 Fifth Avenue, New York, and also should join the Voluntary Parenthood League, 206 Broadway, New York. Get the literature of these organizations and circulate them and help spread the light. As to the knowledge which you need, the only advice I am allowed to give is that you should seek it. Seek it and persist in seeking until you find it. Ask everyone you know, and ask particularly among enlightened people, those who are willing to face the facts of human life and trust in reason and common sense. I do not know if I am violating the law in thus telling you how to find out about birth control. One of the charming features of this law, and others against the spreading of knowledge, is that they will never tell you in advance what you may say, but leave you to say it and take your chances. I believe that I am not violating any law when I tell you that there are half dozen simple, inexpensive, and entirely harmless methods of preventing undesired parenthood without the destruction of the marital relationships. I am one of those who, for many years, believed that the destruction of the marital relationship was the only proper and moral method. I was brought up to take the monkish view of love. I thought it was an animal thing which required some outside justification. I had been taught nothing else, but now I have had personal experience of other justifications of love, and I believe that love is a beautiful and joyful relationship, which not merely requires no other justification, but confers justification upon many other things in life. I used to believe in that old ideal of celibacy, thinking it is a fine spiritual exercise. But since then, I have looked out on life and have found so many interesting things to do, so much important work calling for attention, that I do not have to invent any artificial exercises for my spirit. I have looked at humanity and brought myself to recognize the plain common sense fact that whatever superfluous energy I may have to waste upon artificial spirituality, the great mass of the people have no such energy to spare. They need all their energies to get a living for themselves and for their wives and little ones. They have their sex impulses and will follow them, and the only question is, shall they follow them wisely or unwisely? The religious people decide that sexual indulgence is wrong, and they impose a penalty. And what is that penalty? A poor, unwanted little waif of a soul, which never sinned and had nothing to do with the matter, is brought into a hostile world to suffer neglect, perhaps starvation, in order to punish parents who did not happen to be sufficiently strong-willed to practice continence in marriage. I used to believe that there was benefit to health and increase of power, whether physical or mental, in the celibate life. I have tried both ways of life, and as a result I know that that old idea is nonsense. I know now that love is a natural function. Of course, like any other function, it can be abused, just as hunger may become gluttony, sleeping may become sluggishness, getting the money to pay one's way through life may become ferocious avarice. But we do not on this account refuse ever to eat or sleep or get money to pay our debts. I do not say that I believe, I say I know that free and happy love, guided by wisdom and sound knowledge, is not merely conducive to health, but is in the long run necessary to health. People who condemn birth control always argue as if one wished to teach this knowledge indiscriminately to the young. And perhaps it is natural that those who oppose the use of reason should assume that others are as irrational as themselves. All I can say is that I no more believe in teaching birth control to the young than I believe in feeding beefsteak to nursing infants. There is a period in life for beefsteaks, or, if my vegetarian friends prefer, for lentil hash and peanut butter sandwiches. In exactly the same way, there is a time for teaching the fundamentals of sex, and another time for teaching the art of happiness in marriage, which includes birth control. That brings me by a very pleasant transition to the other two subjects which I have promised to discuss: early marriage and education for marriage.